Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you a first look at number 3 of the newly announced trio of lenses that are designed purposely for Sony full-frame mirrorless along with Leica L. And so thus far I have taken a look first at the 35mm F2.8, the small lens of this trio. Then I looked at the 14 to 24mm F2.8 art zoom lens and wide angle zoom, and was really impressed with that lens and its performance. And so now we're looking at the most expensive and the physically largest of this trio, and it is a unique lens for Sony. To my knowledge, it is the first autofocusing F1.2 lens on the Sony system. So this is a 35mm F1.2, and so it carries the art designation, and it has the, designed purposely for mirrorless, and with some of the perks and design elements that are unique to mirrorless use. So today we're going to jump in and take a closer hands-on look at the build, the design, and the specifications of this lens, some of the basic handling elements. So let's jump in and let's take a look at it. So while I've recently reported on a few Sigma lenses that were decidedly un-Sigma, either very small or shrinking in size, this feels very Sigma-ish in that this is easily the largest 35mm lens that I have actually reviewed at this point. And so this, of course, is a 35mm F1.2, so that means that it's got a third stop advantage over the more pedestrian 35mm F1.4 lenses. Now, here's a competing 35mm F1.4 lens from Samyang. I've often used also the Canon 35mm F1.4 adapted onto Sony as well. So just to give you a little bit of idea of how the size compares here, even if you're looking at the Sigma Art, F1.4 Art in an E-mount, it weighs in at about 1.5 pounds or 665 grams. This lens weighs in at 38.45 ounces or 1,090 grams. And so it is over 400 grams more. And by the way, that compares to the Samyang at 645 grams. And so in this case, it's, an additional 450 pretty much grams. And then the Sony Zeiss Distagon 35mm F1.4 is 630 grams by comparison. And so this is definitely in a whole different weight and size category. And of course, that is probably going to be the, I would say, single largest limiting factor for a lot of people as to whether or not they can accommodate the size. Now, just to give you an idea of the size visually, this is on the new Sony A7R Mark IV camera body. And so you can see that it's not unrealistic here. It's not so huge, but it is certainly large. And so going beyond that, however, and just to give you some of the basic dimensions here, again, in terms of the overall length of the lens, it is 5.36 inches or 136.2 millimeters. It is 3.46 inches in diameter. And so it has a large, but these days not uncommon, 82 millimeter front filter thread. So not really a serious concern there. Now, for your money, you're getting a beautifully made lens. I mean, I've got the Samyang here, and it has a decent build, very simple and straightforward, some metal alloy in the body. But the Sigma has, well, it's just at a whole nother level in terms of the degree of build. This is definitely very much a pro-grade lens. And as you can see from the diagram here, it has what I count as 8 internal seals, and starting from the mount, and then with the front element being treated also for, to be like dust and oil, or I should say water and oil resistant. Furthermore, you've got a very feature-rich lens that is very reminiscent of the G Master lenses. And so it has the option of the hybrid aperture. You can either put it into automatic mode and control it from within the camera, or let the camera control it. But then you can also control it yourself in 1/3 click detents. You also have an option, however, to declick the aperture, and so you can do smooth aperture racking for video work right in there. And so, most people would argue that if you're going to go to the trouble of adding an aperture ring like this, having the ability to declick it is one of the most important reasons to have that. And of course, they've done that here. Along the side of the lens, you've also got an AF/MF switch, which many of you have heard me say I love having that. To me, it's still the most logical way to switch between autofocus and manual focus, and it also is more definite than just programming some button to where you don't have that kind of tactile confirmation. There's also an autofocus hold button, of course, that can be programmed. Whatever you've set that functionality to within the camera, that button will accomplish. So, prior to these recent Sigma lenses, I hadn't seen this feature on anything that wasn't branded Sony, and so great to see there. You've got a nice kind of cut above lens hood. It does have a release button there. And so, that's, nice to have to help to lock it. But then also I really like when they put this kind of rubberized zone, has a nice soft touch area. And so it also means that when you're actually mounting and unmounting it, you've got a nice place to grip. And so it's just a little nicer made lens hood than what a lot of competing lenses, say like what the Samyang's is here. Now, other things that are unique is that it has a little bit more aperture blades than what some competing lenses do. It has 11 rounded aperture blades rather than the more standard 9 aperture blades. Now, I will point out, of course, that the aperture, like the focus ring, is all electronic, and so in this case, unless the camera is on, that aperture ring is not going to control anything. But and so you can see there's actually just a tiny bit of lag, and that's because it's still electronically controlled. And so the input that I put, it lags just a little behind that. Likewise, when it comes to manual focus here, the manual focus ring is focused by wire, as is the case for all mirrorless lenses that are designed for mirrorless. The focus ring, I will say, while it's not fast for making major focus changes, it is very nicely damped. Actually almost a little bit on the heavy side, but I don't consider it a bad thing because it's pretty easy to fine-tune focus, and so good things there. It's got Sony's focus, or excuse me, or Sigma's focus motors for mirrorless here, and so as we'll see, it is fairly quiet in operation and works fairly smoothly. And so all in all, you've got a lot of lens for your money. Now, the lens can focus down to what is almost a complete standard 30 centimeters, right under a foot, and that gives you a magnification of 0.19 times, which is pretty standard. It is shared by the F1.4 art, and it's actually a little bit better than the Samyang, that while it focuses down to the same level, it only reproduces at 0.17 times, and so a very usable standard there. The lens optical formula is 17 elements in 12 groups, which makes it considerably more complex than what any of the competing lenses are. Just to give you an idea, the Sony Zeiss is 12 elements in 8 groups. The Samyang is only 11 elements in 9 groups. And so it's definitely optically complex with 17 elements in 12 groups. And so price point comes in at $1,499 US, which slots in about $100 less than the Sony Zeiss lens, but considerably more expensive than alternatives. In fact, it is about 3 times as more expensive than what the Samyang is. So you have to be very intentional about wanting what this lens can produce to both put up with the size and weight and then also the price. So as you can see, this is back to being definitely a Sigma lens. It is large, it is heavy, and what is not necessarily typical for Sigma, it is fairly expensive. Now, as we saw, it does still manage to undercut the Sony Zeiss 35mm F1.4 lens, but of course that lens does occupy the upper tier of cost when it comes to the 35mm options that are available on Sony at this point. It also, of course, offers up something that no other 35mm lens does, and that is the ability to open the aperture all the way to f1.2, which certainly has some advantages, everything from the amount of defocus it can produce to how low of light that you can shoot in. And so some advantages definitely there, and we'll explore that more in our subsequent episodes. We'll take a look in our next episode at the image quality, and while I don't have the Sony Zeiss on hand, I will compare it to both the lenses that you saw, and that would include the Samyang 35mm f1.4, which is a native, competing lens on Sony. But then also we'll take a look at, what I consider to be one of the superlative 35mm options, and that is that Canon 35L Mark II, and we'll adapt it onto Sony and see how it compares. And so stay tuned for all of that. Also, in the final episode, I'll talk to you about image quality, I'll show you some video performance, we'll sum everything up, and I'll give you my final verdict at that point. So stay tuned for all of that. In the meantime, if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to an image gallery where you can take a closer look at photos that I have shared in this episode, but of course, more importantly, all the photos that I'll be adding as I continue to shoot with the lens. You can also find buying links there if you'd like to purchase one for yourself. There's also linkage there to follow me on social media, to become a patron and get advanced screenings of upcoming content. Also, there is an opportunity to sign up for my newsletter, and so that you don't miss out on any of the upcoming content. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.